I was halfway through my morning coffee when I looked out the kitchen window and saw construction crews tearing up the eastern edge of my property in Asheville, North Carolina. And that was the exact moment I knew the Ridgemont Hills HOA had finally lost their minds. The sound of jackhammers and heavy machinery had woken me up at 7 in the morning, which was unusual for a Thursday. I lived at the corner of the Ridgemont Hills development, a sprawling suburban nightmare of cookie-cutter houses and overzealous neighborhood regulations. My property was different, though. I had purchased it back in 2018, before the HOA even existed, and my deed specifically stated that my lot extended a full 30 feet beyond what the newer residents assumed was the boundary line. That strip of land had been a point of contention for years, but I had the surveys, the property records, and the legal documentation to prove it was mine. My name is Xavier Anderson, and I am a civil engineer by trade, which meant I knew exactly what I was looking at when I saw those construction vehicles parked on my land. They were not just doing maintenance on the existing HOA parking lot. They were expanding it directly onto my property without so much as a phone call or a knock on my door. I threw on a jacket and boots and marched outside. The October air was crisp, and the smell of diesel fuel hung heavy as I approached the worksite. A balding man in a neon safety vest was directing a backhoe operator, pointing toward a section of ground that was definitely, unquestionably on my side of the property line. "Hey," I shouted over the noise. "What the hell is going on here?" The man turned, looking annoyed at the interruption. "HOA construction project. You will need to take it up with the board if you have concerns." "This is my land," I said, my voice rising. "You are literally tearing up my property right now." He pulled out a folded paper from his clipboard and showed me what appeared to be a work order. "Says here this is approved HOA common area expansion. We have got permits and everything." "Permits do not override property ownership," I snapped. "I am telling you right now this is my land and you need to stop immediately." The foreman shrugged. "Look, buddy, I just do what I am told. The HOA hired us, gave us the plans, and we are following them. You have got an issue, call them." I pulled out my phone and did exactly that. The HOA office number rang 4 times before someone picked up. "Ridgemont Hills HOA, this is Deborah speaking." "This is Xavier Anderson at 1247 Ridgecrest Drive. There is a construction crew tearing up my property right now, and I want an explanation immediately." There was a pause, some shuffling of papers. "Oh yes, Mr. Anderson, that would be the parking lot expansion project. It was approved at last month's board meeting. You cannot approve construction on private property that you do not own," I said, struggling to keep my temper in check. "My land is not part of the HOA common area. According to our records, that land falls within the designated community parking zone," Deborah replied in that infuriatingly chipper voice that HOA administrators seem to perfect. "The board voted unanimously to proceed with the expansion. I do not care what your records say. I have the legal property survey that shows that land is mine. I purchased this house before your HOA even existed." "Well, that is certainly something you can bring up at the next board meeting, Mr. Anderson. Those are held on the 3rd Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. The next meeting." I was nearly shouting now. "That is 3 weeks away. By then you will have paved over my entire yard. I am sure we can work something out, sir. In the meantime, the construction is scheduled to continue as planned." I hung up before I said something I would regret. The construction crew had already moved on to marking out additional sections with spray paint, completely ignoring my presence. I took photos and videos of everything, documenting the exact locations and the equipment they were using. As a civil engineer, I knew the value of thorough documentation. By noon, they had excavated a trench that ran nearly 40 feet into what was legally my property. They were preparing the ground for asphalt, adding gravel base and setting up forms. I had spent the morning making phone calls to my attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Green who had handled my real estate closing years ago. "Xavier, this is pretty clear-cut," Patricia said after I had emailed her all my documentation. "They are trespassing and committing property damage. I can file for an immediate injunction, but judges move slowly. In the meantime, you might want to consider physical barriers." "Like what?" "Anything that makes it clear they are crossing onto private property. Signs, stakes, rope barriers. If they damage or remove those barriers, it strengthens your case that they are knowingly trespassing." I drove to the hardware store and bought a dozen metal stakes, high-visibility rope, and several large signs that read "Private Property, No Trespassing." When I returned, the construction crew was on lunch break, their vehicles parked haphazardly across both the existing HOA lot and my land. I spent the next hour hammering stakes into the ground along my actual property line and stringing the rope between them. The signs went up every 10 feet, impossible to miss. When the construction crew returned from lunch, the foreman looked at my handiwork and shook his head. "Really, man," he said. "Really," I replied. "Cross that line again and I am calling the police." He made a phone call, presumably to whoever had hired his crew. I watched as his expression shifted from annoyed to confused to outright frustrated. When he hung up, he walked over to me. "My boss says we have been paid to finish this job, and that is what we are doing. The HOA assured us they have legal right to this land." "Then the HOA lied to you," I said flatly. "And if you proceed, you are knowingly damaging private property. I have it on video that I have informed you of this." The foreman looked at the stakes, at his crew, and back at me. For a moment, I thought reason might prevail. Then he turned to his crew and said, "Pull down those stakes and keep working." That was when I called the Asheville Police Department. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. I met them at the curb with my folder of property documents, surveys, and photographs. Officer Jenkins, a tall man with graying hair, listened patiently as I explained the situation. His partner, Officer Martinez, walked over to examine the property line markers I had set up. "So let me get this straight," Jenkins said, flipping through my survey documents. "This land currently being excavated is legally yours according to these surveys, correct?" "I have the deed, the original survey from 2018, and an updated survey I commissioned last year when the HOA first started making noise about expanding their parking lot." Martinez returned from her inspection. The construction crew admits they took down his property markers and continued working. "They say the HOA gave them authorization." Jenkins nodded slowly. "The HOA cannot give authorization to work on property they do not own. That is pretty straightforward trespassing and property damage." He walked over to the foreman and had a lengthy conversation. I could not hear everything, but I caught phrases like "cease work immediately" and "civil liability." The foreman's face grew redder with each passing moment. Eventually, Jenkins returned to me. "They are shutting down for the day," he said. "This is going to have to be resolved between you and the HOA. If they continue work before that is resolved, call us again, and we will cite them for trespassing." "What about the damage they have already done?" I asked, gesturing at the excavated trenches and torn-up ground. "That is a civil matter. You will need to pursue that through the courts." It was not the answer I wanted, but it was something. The construction crew packed up their equipment, though they left some materials on site. As they drove away, I noticed several of my neighbors watching from their windows and yards. Nobody came over to talk to me. That was typical. Ever since I had refused to join the HOA and pay their ridiculous fees, I had been treated like a pariah. That evening, I received an email from someone named Brenda Patterson, president of the Ridgemont Hills HOA board. The email was CC'd to the entire board and apparently every homeowner in the development. Mr. Anderson, it has come to our attention that you interfered with approved community improvement construction today. The parking lot expansion project has been planned for months and is necessary to accommodate the growing needs of our community. Your obstruction of this project is selfish and demonstrates a complete disregard for your neighbors. We strongly encourage you to remove the barriers you have erected and allow the construction to proceed. The board will be discussing your actions at our next meeting, and we may pursue legal action if you continue to impede community development. The email was so absurd I almost laughed. Instead, I composed a careful response, also replying to everyone on the distribution list. Miss Patterson, the land you are attempting to build on is private property, legally owned by me as documented in my property deed and survey. At no point did anyone from the HOA contact me to request use of this land, obtain an easement, or discuss any kind of agreement. Having a board meeting and voting on something does not give you the right to seize private property. I have contacted my attorney and will be pursuing all legal remedies available to me. The barriers will remain in place, and any further attempt to construct on my land will be treated as criminal trespassing. I did not have to wait long for a response. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Anderson, this is Brenda Patterson from the HOA board. Her voice was shrill and aggressive. I cannot believe your attitude toward this community. We are trying to make improvements that benefit everyone. By stealing my land, I replied calmly. That land should have been part of the HOA common area when this development was planned. It is an oversight that you managed to buy it separately. It is not an oversight, Miss Patterson. It is called private property ownership. You know that thing protected by law. We have done our research, Mr. Anderson. That strip of land is practically useless to you. It is just grass. We are putting it to good use for the community. Then I assume you will be compensating me fairly for it, I said, knowing full well what her answer would be. Compensate. This is for the community good. Your property values will increase with improved amenities. So that is a no. You want to take my land, build on it, and give me nothing in return. You are being completely unreasonable. Brenda's voice had risen to a near shriek. Everyone in this neighborhood thinks you are selfish. You will not even join the HOA. You do not participate in community events, and now you are blocking necessary improvements. I am not blocking anything except the theft of my property. If the HOA wants to use my land, you can make me a formal, written offer to purchase it at fair market value. Otherwise, stay off it. She hung up without another word. Over the weekend, things escalated. On Saturday morning, I discovered that someone had cut my rope barriers and pulled up several of my stakes during the night. I replaced them and added a trail camera pointed at the property line. On Sunday, I received a formal letter from the HOA attorney, a pompous document claiming that I was in violation of some obscure county ordinance about obstruction of public access ways. Patricia, my attorney, laughed when I forwarded it to her. Public access way, that is completely made up. They are grasping at straws. I will file the injunction on Monday morning. In the meantime, keep documenting everything. Monday brought the biggest shock yet. I left for work at my usual time, around 7:30 in the morning, and returned home just after 5 in the evening. What I saw made me slam on my brakes so hard that my truck screeched. The HOA had not just continued construction. They had finished it. The parking lot had been extended exactly as they had planned, paved right over my property. Fresh asphalt gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the smell of tar hung in the air. But that was not even the worst part. They had installed bollards, those heavy metal posts designed to prevent vehicle access, directly across what had been the open edge of my property. The bollards created a barrier between my remaining yard and the newly paved section, effectively cordoning off their illegal parking lot expansion. And parked in this new section, utilizing spaces marked with fresh white paint, were 12 cars belonging to my neighbors. I sat in my truck for a full minute trying to process what I was seeing. They had not just trespassed and built on my land. They had completed an entire construction project, installed permanent fixtures, and allowed residents to use it. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. I pulled out my phone and started recording everything. Each car, each parking space, the bollards, the fresh asphalt that covered what had been my grass just 3 days ago. Then I called Patricia. "They finished it," I said when she answered. "They paved the whole thing and put up bollards." There was silence on the other end. "Then, they what?" "The parking lot. They completed the entire expansion while I was at work today, and there are cars parked in it. A dozen of them." "Xavier, that is possibly the dumbest thing I have ever heard an HOA do, and I have seen some monumentally stupid HOA decisions. Do not do anything. I am filing an emergency motion first thing tomorrow morning. This just went from trespassing to property seizure." That evening, I received another email from Brenda Patterson. This one was short and smug. "Mr. Anderson, as you can see, the parking lot expansion has been completed. The community thanks you for your contribution to this important improvement. We hope this resolves the matter." Contribution. They were calling the theft of my land a contribution. I replied immediately. "Miss Patterson, you have illegally paved over private property and installed permanent structures without authorization. Every day those bollards remain on my land, and every vehicle parked in that lot constitutes ongoing trespassing. You have until Wednesday at noon to remove all structures and vehicles from my property, or I will take action to remove them myself." Her response came within minutes. "Any interference with HOA property will result in immediate legal action and fines." I did not bother responding. Instead, I reviewed the footage from my trail camera. It showed everything. A construction crew arriving at 8 in the morning, just after I had left for work. Heavy equipment rolling over my property markers. The paving process. The installation of the bollards. All of it documented in high-definition video. Tuesday morning, Patricia filed the emergency motion. By noon, she called me with an update. "The judge is reviewing it, but these things take time. He wants to see all the documentation, which I provided. The hearing is scheduled for Thursday morning." "That is 2 more days of them using my property as a parking lot," I said. "I know. But if you do anything to those cars or that parking lot before we have a court order, it could hurt your case. I know it is frustrating, but you need to wait." Wednesday came and went. My deadline passed. The 12 cars remained parked on my property, their owners coming and going as if nothing was wrong. I recognized most of them. There was the young couple from 2 houses down who drove matching gray sedans. The retired man with the pickup truck who always gave me dirty looks. The single woman with the expensive SUV who had once called the police on me for having my trash cans visible from the street a day before pickup. Thursday morning arrived, and I dressed in my best suit for the court hearing. Patricia met me at the Buncombe County Courthouse, looking confident with a rolling briefcase full of documents. "This should be straightforward," she said as we walked through security. "We have surveys, deeds, photographs, video evidence, everything." The HOA has nothing except their own meeting minutes where they voted to use your property. The hearing was in front of Judge Raymond Morrison, an older man with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. Both sides presented their cases. Patricia laid out the evidence methodically, submitting the property surveys, my deed, the photographs showing the construction progression, and the video footage from my trail camera. The HOA attorney, a slick-looking man named Gerald Hoffman, tried to argue that the property line was ambiguous and that the HOA had acted in good faith based on their understanding of the community boundaries. Judge Morrison was not having it. "Mr. Hoffman," the judge said, interrupting the attorney mid-sentence, "I have reviewed the surveys submitted by Mr. Anderson. They are certified professional surveys that clearly delineate his property boundaries. What exactly is ambiguous about that?" "Your Honor, the HOA has maintained that land as common area for years. There is an argument for adverse possession. Adverse possession requires continuous, open, and hostile use for at least 7 years under North Carolina law. The HOA has only existed for 5 years, and Mr. Anderson has documentation showing he has consistently maintained and used that land. Try again." Hoffman shuffled his papers. "The parking lot expansion serves the community interest and increases property values for all residents." "That is not a legal argument for seizing private property, Counselor. Even if it were in the community interest, which is debatable, there are legal processes for obtaining land through eminent domain or negotiated purchase. An HOA board voting to build on someone else's property is not one of those processes." The judge turned to Patricia. "What is your client seeking?" "Immediate removal of all structures built on his property, restoration of the land to its original condition, compensation for damages, and a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from using his land without explicit written permission." Judge Morrison nodded. "Granted. All of it." "The HOA has 7 days to remove all structures, vehicles, and paving from Mr. Anderson's property and restore it to its previous condition. Failure to comply will result in contempt charges and daily fines of $1,000. Additionally, the HOA will pay Mr. Anderson $15,000 in damages and will cover all his legal fees. The permanent injunction is in place effective immediately." Hoffman jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, removing the parking lot will leave 12 vehicles with nowhere to park. The HOA lot is at capacity, which is why the expansion was necessary. Then those 12 vehicle owners have a problem, do not they? Should have parked in legal spaces. This hearing is concluded." I walked out of the courthouse feeling like I had just won the lottery. Patricia was grinning ear to ear. "That was beautiful," she said. "I have never seen Morrison lay into an HOA attorney like that. They really stepped in it this time." "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now they have 7 days to comply. If they do not, the fines start adding up fast. $1,000 a day adds up to a lot of motivation." I drove home, expecting to see some kind of activity or acknowledgement of the court order. Instead, everything looked exactly the same. The 12 cars were still parked in the illegal spaces, the bollards were still standing, and the asphalt was still covering my property. That evening, I received a group email from Brenda Patterson to all HOA members. "Dear residents, despite our best efforts to improve community amenities, Xavier Anderson has obtained a court order demanding removal of the new parking lot extension. This selfish action will result in significant inconvenience and expense to our community. We are exploring all legal options to appeal this unjust decision. In the meantime, we ask for your patience and understanding during this difficult time. My blood boiled reading it. She was still playing the victim, making me out to be the bad guy for defending my own property. I composed my own response to the group. Dear neighbors, for clarity, the HOA built a parking lot on my private property without permission, authorization, or compensation. This is called theft. The court agreed, which is why they ordered its removal. If you are inconvenienced by having to find legal parking spaces, I suggest you direct your frustration at the HOA board members who created this situation by ignoring property law. The responses started flooding in within minutes. Most were hostile, accusing me of being petty and selfish. A few were supportive, including one from an older resident named Margaret who wrote, "If they can steal Xavier's land, they can steal anyone's. Good for you for standing up to them." Friday passed with no action from the HOA. Saturday and Sunday came and went. The cars remained parked on my property. Monday morning, Patricia called the HOA attorney to remind him of the court order and the impending fines. They are claiming they need more time to arrange for a contractor, Patricia told me. I informed Hoffman that the clock is ticking and the judge's order was very clear. Can they just ignore it? I asked. Technically, no, but some people think they can outlast the consequences. Let me send them a very clear reminder about the contempt charges and fines. By Tuesday, 6 days after the court order, nothing had changed. I took photos documenting that the structures remained and that vehicles were still using the illegal parking spaces. On Wednesday morning, I drove to the courthouse with Patricia to file a contempt motion. We tried to give them every opportunity to comply, Patricia told the clerk as she filed the paperwork. They have chosen to ignore a direct court order. The contempt hearing was scheduled for Friday morning, which would be exactly 9 days after the original order. When I got home Wednesday afternoon, I finally saw some activity. A tow truck was parked near the illegal lot, and an extremely angry woman was screaming at the driver. I recognized her as Susan Fletcher, one of Brenda Patterson's loyal supporters on the HOA board. Her SUV was being hooked up to the tow truck. "You cannot do this," she shrieked. "This is a legal parking space." The tow truck driver, a burly man with a thick beard, looked completely unfazed. "Madam, I have a court order authorizing removal of any vehicle parked on this property. You want to dispute it, call your lawyer. I am on the HOA board. I will have your company sued." "Good luck with that," he replied, finishing the hookup. "Your vehicle will be at Asheville Impound on Patton Avenue. They close at 6. Susan turned and saw me standing in my driveway watching the scene unfold. Her face turned purple with rage. "This is your fault," she screamed, stomping toward me. "You are ruining this neighborhood." "No, Susan," I replied calmly. "I am recovering my stolen property. There is a difference." "We are going to make your life hell. You will regret this," the tow truck driver interjected. "Madam," that sounded like a threat. "Might want to watch what you say." Susan made several more angry gestures before storming off toward her house. The tow truck drove away with her SUV, and I noticed several of my neighbors watching from their windows. Within the hour, 2 more tow trucks arrived and began removing additional vehicles from the illegal spaces. My phone rang. It was Patricia, and she was laughing. "Did you hire tow trucks?" she asked. "No, that was not me. I was going to wait for the contempt hearing." "Well, someone did. I just got an angry call from Hoffman demanding to know by what authority vehicles are being towed. I told him that property owners have the right to remove trespassing vehicles from their land, especially when there is a court order in place. He threatened to file an emergency motion. "Let him try," I said. By evening, all 12 vehicles had been towed. The owners were livid. flooding the HOA email list with angry messages. Most of them assumed I had called the tow trucks, though I later learned it was actually Patricia who had arranged it through a company she worked with regularly. Apparently, she had gotten tired of waiting for the HOA to comply. Thursday brought a new development. A construction crew arrived, but this time they were there to remove the parking lot, not build it. I watched from my porch as workers began the process of tearing out the bollards and breaking up the asphalt. It was deeply satisfying to see those metal posts being pulled from the ground and loaded onto trucks. Brenda Patterson appeared around noon, looking like she had not slept in days. She marched across the street toward my house, and I met her at the property line. "Are you happy now?" she demanded. "Do you know how much this is costing the HOA? About as much as it cost to build it illegally in the first place, I imagine," I replied. "You could have just let us use the land. It was not hurting you." "Brenda, you did not ask, you did not offer to buy it, you did not request an easement. You just took it and expected me to accept it. That is called theft. The community needed that parking." Her voice was rising again, attracting the attention of nearby neighbors. "We have a shortage of spaces, and that land was the perfect solution." "Then you should have negotiated with me like reasonable adults instead of trying to steal it." "Nobody wants to negotiate with you. You are hostile and uncooperative. You refuse to join the HOA, you do not follow community standards, and you are constantly causing problems." "I follow the law," I said evenly, "which is more than I can say for your board." She opened her mouth to say something else, but one of the construction workers called out to her, "Madam, we need you to sign off on the removal plan." Brenda shot me one final glare before stalking back to the worksite. The removal process continued for the rest of the day and into Friday morning. By the time Patricia and I arrived at the courthouse for the contempt hearing, the parking lot was completely gone. The asphalt had been torn up, the bollards were removed, and the construction crew was beginning the process of regrading the land. Judge Morrison reviewed the photographic evidence I had submitted showing the 9-day delay in compliance. "Mr. Hoffman," the judge said, "your clients were given a very clear order with a specific timeline. They missed that timeline by 2 days. Your Honor, arranging for removal of such substantial structures takes time. The HOA acted as quickly as reasonably possible. And yet somehow they managed to build those structures in a single day," Morrison replied dryly. "The contempt charges stand. The HOA owes Mr. Anderson $2,000 in fines for the 2 days of non-compliance, in addition to the previously ordered damages and legal fees. Furthermore, I am ordering the HOA to complete the land restoration within 14 days. That means topsoil, grading, and seeding. If that is not completed, we will be back here discussing additional fines." After the hearing, Patricia and I went to lunch at a nearby restaurant to celebrate. I was finally starting to feel like this nightmare was coming to an end. "So what happens to the HOA now?" I asked over sandwiches. "They will have to pay you $17,000 total, plus my fees, which are around $8,000. They will have to complete the restoration." And hopefully they learned a very expensive lesson about property rights. "You think they will try anything else?" Patricia shrugged. "Some HOAs never learn, but you have got a permanent injunction now, and they know you are willing to fight back. My guess is they will leave you alone, at least regarding this specific piece of land." She was half right. The land restoration was completed within the 14-day window, though the work was sloppy and clearly done by the cheapest contractor the HOA could find. The grading was uneven, the topsoil was thin, and the grass seed they used was not even the right type for the region. But technically, they had complied with the court order. I received a check from the HOA for $17,000, along with a curt letter from Brenda Patterson stating that the matter was now closed. Patricia received her payment for legal fees as well. I deposited the check and hoped that would be the end of it. It was not. 2 weeks after the restoration was completed, I received a notice from the HOA claiming I was in violation of community standards for having an unmaintained yard. They were citing the freshly restored section of my property, which admittedly looked rough with its patchy grass and uneven grading. I forwarded the notice to Patricia with a note that simply read, "You have got to be kidding me." She called me an hour later, laughing so hard she could barely speak. "They are fining you for the yard condition that resulted from them complying with the court order to restore your property." That is absolutely insane. What do I do? Ignore it. You are not part of the HOA, remember. They have no authority to fine you. If they try to place a lien on your property, we will fight it and probably win another lawsuit against them. The fines kept coming. Every week, I received a new notice claiming violations for various minor issues. My trash cans were visible from the street. My mailbox needed repainting. My lawn was not mowed to regulation height. Each notice threatened fines ranging from $50 to $500. I ignored all of them, as Patricia had advised. But the harassment did not stop there. Someone reported my truck to the city, claiming it was inoperable and parked illegally. It was neither, and the city inspector who came out apologized for wasting both our time. Someone else called animal control claiming I had aggressive dogs. I do not own any dogs. They are retaliating, Patricia said when I told her about the various complaints. Document everything. If it continues, we can pursue harassment charges. The situation reached a breaking point 3 months after the court order. I was working in my garage on a Saturday afternoon when I heard shouting outside. I walked out to find Brenda Patterson standing in my driveway, surrounded by 4 other HOA board members, including Susan Fletcher. "We need to talk," Brenda announced. "I have nothing to say to you," I replied. "Anything you want to communicate can go through my attorney." "This has gone on long enough," Susan interjected. "You have caused enough problems for this community. We want you to leave." I stared at her. "Leave? This is my house." "Sell it and move somewhere else," Brenda said. "Clearly you are not happy here and we are not happy with you. It would be better for everyone if you just left." "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said slowly. "You want me to sell my house and move because you are upset that I would not let you steal my land." "You are twisting it," another board member said, a man named Robert I vaguely recognized. "You refuse to be part of this community. You do not participate, you do not contribute, and you cause constant conflicts." "I participate by being a good neighbor and following the law. I should not have to explain that stealing is wrong." "Nobody stole anything," Susan was shouting again. "That land should have been community property. The developer made a mistake selling it to you separately." "Take it up with the developer then," I said. "I bought my property legally and I am not going anywhere." Brenda stepped closer, her face flushed with anger. "You have made an enemy of every single person in this neighborhood. Your life here is going to be miserable. Constant complaints, constant scrutiny, constant problems. Is it really worth it just to be stubborn? If you are threatening to harass me, I should mention that I am recording this conversation," I said, pulling out my phone, which was indeed recording. "And my attorney would be very interested in hearing you describe your plans to make my life miserable." The group exchanged glances. Brenda's expression shifted from angry to nervous. "That is not what I meant," she backtracked. "I am simply pointing out that you might be happier elsewhere." "Noted. Now get off my property before I call the police for trespassing." They left, but the damage was done. Over the next few weeks, the harassment intensified. I found nails scattered in my driveway. My mailbox was knocked over twice. Someone spray-painted "Move" on my garage door. Each time, I filed police reports and saved the footage from the security cameras I had installed around my property. The cameras proved invaluable. One night at 2 in the morning, they caught Susan Fletcher and another woman I did not recognize creeping around my yard, preparing to dump what looked like weed killer on my grass. I called the police immediately, and both women were arrested for trespassing and attempted property damage. The arrest sent shockwaves through the HOA. Suddenly, the board was facing serious legal consequences for their actions. Susan was charged with misdemeanor trespassing and vandalism. Her accomplice, a woman named Diane, who was apparently Susan's sister-in-law, faced the same charges. The arrest report made the local news, and the story of the HOA's ongoing harassment campaign became public knowledge. The news coverage was not flattering. Local reporters dug into the original parking lot controversy, obtained copies of the court orders, and interviewed several attorneys about HOA overreach. This is a textbook case of an HOA board abusing their perceived authority, one attorney told a TV reporter. They attempted to seize private property, ignored court orders, and then engaged in a sustained harassment campaign against a homeowner who dared to stand up for his rights. It is absolutely egregious. The negative publicity put pressure on the HOA board. Within a week of Susan's arrest, Brenda Patterson announced she was stepping down as board president. She claimed it was for personal reasons, but everyone knew it was because she had become the face of the scandal. Susan Fletcher was forced to resign from the board as a condition of her plea deal. She pled guilty to misdemeanor trespassing and was sentenced to 50 hours of community service and 1 year of probation. Diane took a similar deal. With both Brenda and Susan gone, the HOA board underwent significant changes. A new president was elected, a mild-mannered accountant named Thomas, who seemed genuinely interested in repairing the community's reputation. He reached out to me through Patricia, requesting a meeting to clear the air. "I know you have no reason to trust the board," Thomas said when we met at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Asheville. Patricia was with me, taking notes. "But I want you to know that the new board is committed to following the law and treating all residents fairly, whether they are HOA members or not." "That is good to hear," I said neutrally. "We have dropped all the violation notices against you." They were inappropriate, and several of them were clearly retaliatory. We also want to formally apologize for everything that happened with the parking lot situation. I appreciate the apology, though it does not undo the damage. I understand. I also wanted to discuss the parking situation, because it is still a real issue for the community. We genuinely do need more parking spaces. Would you be willing to discuss a legal arrangement for using that land? I had been expecting this. What kind of arrangement? We would like to lease the land from you. Fair market rate, paid monthly, with a formal written agreement. You would retain ownership, and the lease could be terminated by either party with proper notice. It was a reasonable proposal, much more reasonable than anything the previous board had offered, which was nothing. "How much are we talking?" I asked. Thomas pulled out a folder with some research. "Based on comparable commercial land leases in the area, we are thinking $300 per month. That is $3,600 a year for land you were not using anyway." I glanced at Patricia, who gave a small nod. It was a fair offer. "I want several conditions," I said. "First, the lease agreement clearly states that I retain full ownership and can terminate with 90 days' notice. Second, the HOA is responsible for all maintenance and upkeep of that section, including landscaping. Third, the HOA carries liability insurance that covers any incidents in that parking area. Fourth, the agreement includes a clause stating that if the HOA attempts to claim any ownership rights or adverse possession in the future, the lease is immediately void and the HOA owes me a penalty equal to 5 years of lease payments. Thomas nodded along. Those all seem reasonable. I will have our attorney draft something and send it to yours for review. We shook hands, and for the first time in months, I felt like the conflict might actually be coming to an end. The lease agreement was finalized 6 weeks later. Patricia reviewed every word and negotiated a few additional protections, including an increase to $400 per month. The HOA board voted unanimously to approve it, eager to finally resolve the parking situation. Before construction could begin on the new lease agreement, the HOA had to go through the proper permitting process with the county. They also had to have the property boundaries professionally surveyed and marked, with both parties agreeing to the survey results. It was the process they should have followed from the very beginning. Construction started in late April, nearly 7 months after the original illegal parking lot had been torn out. This time, I was consulted on every aspect of the design. The HOA proposed a layout that maximized parking spaces while minimizing impact on the surrounding properties. They installed proper drainage, quality asphalt, and tasteful lighting that would not shine into my windows. The bollards were not part of the new design. Instead, the parking area simply blended into the existing HOA lot, with clear signage indicating that it was on leased private property. When the construction was complete, the new section provided 14 parking spaces, 2 more than the original illegal expansion would have created. The HOA residents who needed the extra parking were thrilled, and I was earning nearly $5,000 a year for land I had not been using anyway. The story could have ended there, a nice, neat resolution where everyone won. But there was one more twist. About 2 months after the new parking lot was completed and operating smoothly, I received a subpoena. The district attorney's office was pursuing criminal charges against Brenda Patterson for misconduct in office and misappropriation of HOA funds. The investigation had been triggered by the publicity around the parking lot scandal. When reporters started digging into HOA finances, they discovered some irregularities. Brenda had authorized the illegal parking lot construction, using HOA funds without proper approval, bypassing the normal financial controls. She had also apparently been paying herself and Susan Fletcher consulting fees for several years without board approval. The amounts were not massive, maybe $30,000 total over 3 years, but it was enough for criminal charges. The DA wanted me to testify about the parking lot construction and the subsequent harassment campaign. The trial took place in September, more than a year after the original incident. Brenda had hired a defense attorney who tried to paint her as a well-intentioned community leader who had made some mistakes. The prosecution had a different view, presenting evidence of a pattern of abuse of power and financial misconduct. I testified for about an hour, walking the jury through the timeline of events. I described coming home to find construction on my property, the refusal to stop even after police intervention, the completion of the illegal parking lot, the court orders, and the subsequent harassment. The prosecutor played video footage from my security cameras showing the parking lot construction and Susan Fletcher's late-night attempted vandalism. "Mr. Anderson," the prosecutor asked, "at any point did Miss Patterson or anyone from the HOA board attempt to negotiate with you in good faith for use of your land before beginning construction?" "No," I replied. The first contact I had was when I found them already tearing up my property. Even after I proved it was legally mine, they continued construction and completed the parking lot. And after the court ordered the parking lot removed, how did Miss Patterson respond? She sent emails to all the HOA members painting me as the villain. She showed up at my house with other board members to pressure me to sell and move away. The harassment continued for months until some board members were arrested. The defense attorney tried to discredit me on cross-examination, suggesting I was exaggerating the harassment and that I bore some responsibility for not joining the HOA in the first place. Mr. Anderson, is it not true that much of this conflict could have been avoided if you had simply joined the HOA and participated in community discussions? The defense attorney asked. I do not see how joining the HOA would have given them the right to steal my land, I replied. But you admit that your refusal to join created tension in the neighborhood. I admit that some people were upset that I would not pay fees to an organization I had no obligation to join, but that does not justify theft, trespassing, or harassment. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Brenda Patterson was found guilty on 3 counts. Misconduct in public office. HOA board positions are considered public trusts in North Carolina. Misappropriation of funds and conspiracy to commit property damage. Susan Fletcher had taken a plea deal earlier and testified for the prosecution, which probably helped secure the conviction. Brenda was sentenced to 18 months in prison, suspended to 6 months with 2 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the HOA for the misappropriated funds, plus fines and court costs. Her mugshot and story made the local news again, cementing her as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. The fallout continued for months. Several homeowners sued the HOA for return of fees, claiming the board had been mismanaged under Brenda's leadership. The HOA had to hire a professional management company to restore credibility and proper financial controls. Property values in Ridgemont Hills actually dropped temporarily because of the negative publicity. For me, life slowly returned to normal. The lease payments came in reliably every month. The new HOA board left me alone, as promised. Some of my neighbors remained hostile, but most seemed to accept that I had been in the right all along. A few even apologized for believing the previous board's version of events. Margaret, the older woman who had supported me from the beginning, became something of a friend. She brought me cookies one afternoon and we sat on my porch talking about the whole ordeal. You know, you did everyone a favor, she said. That board was out of control and nobody was willing to stand up to them. You exposed all the corruption and forced real change. I did not set out to do any of that, I replied. I just wanted them to stop building on my land. Sometimes that is all it takes, one person willing to say no. The local newspaper did a follow-up story a year after the initial incident, examining the reforms that had taken place in the HOA. The new board had implemented transparent financial reporting, term limits for officers, and a formal dispute resolution process. They had also amended the HOA rules to include explicit protections for non-member property owners in the development. The Ridgemont Hills parking lot scandal became a wake-up call for HOA reform across the region, the article stated. What started as a simple property dispute revealed deeper issues of accountability and abuse of power in homeowner associations. I was quoted in the article, though I kept my comments brief. I hope other homeowners learn from this that they do not have to accept illegal or unethical behavior from their HOA. Property rights matter, and there are legal protections available. The reporter also interviewed Thomas, the current HOA president who had managed to turn the organization around. "We learned some hard lessons," Thomas said in the article. "The most important being that an HOA is a service organization, not a government. We exist to maintain common areas and help the community, not to control every aspect of residents' lives. The previous board forgot that, and everyone paid the price." As I read the article, I reflected on everything that had happened. What had started as a shocking morning discovering construction equipment on my land had turned into a year-long legal battle, criminal prosecution, and community upheaval. The whole situation could have been avoided with simple communication and respect for property rights. But it had happened, and in a strange way, I was glad it had. The old HOA board had been corrupt and power-hungry, and their downfall had made the neighborhood better for everyone. The new parking lot was actually well designed and served the community effectively, and I was being fairly compensated for providing the land. The HOA had implemented real reforms that would protect other homeowners from similar abuses. 2 years after the initial incident, I was sitting on my porch on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee and watching kids play in the street. The parking lot hummed with quiet activity as residents came and went. The grass had fully grown back on the sections that had been torn up and restored. The whole area looked peaceful and normal. A car pulled up and I was surprised to see Patricia getting out. We had stayed in touch occasionally, but I had not been expecting her. "Xavier," she called out, walking up my driveway. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I would drop by." "Do you have a minute?" "Of course. Want some coffee?" We sat on the porch and she looked around at the neighborhood. "This place looks good, peaceful. Hard to believe it was a war zone 2 years ago." "Time heals most wounds," I said, "though I still get dirty looks from a few neighbors." "I am not surprised, but I wanted to tell you something interesting. Remember how your case got a lot of publicity? Hard to forget. Well, it has become something of a landmark case in HOA law. I have been contacted by at least a dozen attorneys handling similar situations. Your case set a strong precedent about HOA liability for property seizure. Several other homeowners have won cases by citing Judge Morrison's ruling in your favor. I had not thought about the broader implications. So something good came out of all this insanity. Absolutely. You stood up for your rights when a lot of people would have just given in. That matters. We talked for another hour about various legal topics and life in general. After she left, I sat on the porch for a while longer, thinking about everything that had happened. The truth was, I had never wanted to be a crusader or a test case. I just wanted to be left alone to live my life and maintain my property. But when the HOA had overstepped so egregiously, I had no choice but to fight back. The fact that my fight had helped other people facing similar situations was a bonus I had not anticipated. Life in Ridgemont Hills continued. The HOA stayed true to their reformed policies, and the lease arrangement for the parking lot worked smoothly. I received my monthly payments like clockwork, and the HOA maintained the area as agreed. The whole situation had evolved from an illegal land grab to a mutually beneficial business arrangement. One afternoon, about 3 years after the original incident, I was working in my garage when a young couple approached. They introduced themselves as prospective buyers looking at a house down the street. "We heard about what happened with the HOA here," the woman said. "The parking lot thing. Is it safe to buy in this neighborhood now?" I leaned against my workbench, considering the question. The HOA went through a major overhaul after that incident. New leadership, new policies, real accountability. From what I have seen, they are actually pretty reasonable now. "But you are not a member, right?" the man asked. "No. I bought before the HOA existed, so I am not required to join, but I lease them some land for parking and we have a good working relationship. Would you recommend the neighborhood? I thought about it honestly. Yes, actually. Despite everything that happened, this is a good community. People care about their homes, it is safe, the location is convenient. Just make sure you read the HOA rules before you buy, understand what you are agreeing to, and know your property boundaries. They thanked me and left. I went back to my work, but their question stuck with me. Would I recommend Ridgemont Hills after everything that had happened? The answer was genuinely yes, which surprised me a bit. The neighborhood had been through a crisis, but it had come out better on the other side. The new HOA board was competent and ethical. The reforms they had implemented protected homeowners from future abuse. The community had learned that HOA boards answer to the residents, not the other way around. As the years passed, the parking lot incident became part of neighborhood lore. New residents heard the story and often asked me about it. I always gave them the same basic facts. The HOA built on my land without permission. I fought back legally. They lost in court, and the situation eventually resolved with a fair lease agreement. I did not dwell on the harassment or the criminal charges, though those were matters of public record for anyone interested. The lease payments provided a nice supplemental income that I used for various home improvements. I redid my kitchen, upgraded my garage, and installed solar panels. The irony was not lost on me that the HOA's attempt to steal my land had ended up funding improvements to my property. Susan Fletcher moved away about a year after her arrest, unable to handle the stigma. Brenda Patterson served her 6 months and then left the state entirely, as far as anyone knew. The other board members from that era had all resigned or been voted out. The current HOA board was a completely different group of people with a completely different philosophy. 5 years after the incident, the neighborhood had a block party to celebrate some community milestone. I was invited, and to my surprise, I actually went. It was the first HOA event I had ever attended, and people seemed genuinely pleased to see me. Thomas, still the HOA president, approached me with a beer and a smile. "Xavier, glad you could make it. You are officially part of the community now, even if you are not technically a member." "The lease payments help," I joked. "True. But seriously, you have been a good neighbor. And what happened years ago, that needed to happen. We are a better organization because of it." I appreciated the acknowledgement. We talked for a while about neighborhood matters, nothing controversial or heavy. Just normal community stuff, the kind of casual interaction that should have been the norm all along. As I walked home that evening, I reflected on the entire journey. What had started as an outrageous violation of my property rights had transformed into a situation that ultimately benefited everyone. The parking lot existed and served the community. I was being fairly compensated, and the HOA had learned to operate within the law. It had taken legal battles, criminal prosecutions, and a lot of stress, but the outcome was as good as I could have reasonably hoped for. The bollards that had once trapped 12 cars on my illegally paved property were long gone, replaced by a properly designed parking area built on a valid lease agreement. Those 12 car owners had gotten their vehicles back from impound years ago, probably after paying hefty fees. I hoped they had learned something about parking in legal spaces and supporting HOA boards that follow the law. Standing in my driveway that night, looking at the parking lot that had caused so much trouble and now hummed along peacefully, I felt a sense of closure. The fight had been worth it, not just for me, but for the principle that property rights matter and HOAs cannot simply take what they want. I had never set out to be the person who took down a corrupt HOA board. I had just wanted them to stay off my land. But sometimes standing up for yourself has ripple effects you never anticipate. Other homeowners had been protected by the precedent my case set. The neighborhood was better governed. Real reforms had been implemented. As I unlocked my front door and went inside, I smiled. The parking lot was still there, cars neatly arranged in legal spaces on legally leased land. The Bollards were gone, the illegal construction was a distant memory, and the corrupt board members who had caused it all were facing the consequences of their actions. Justice had been served, property rights had been protected, and I had earned a monthly check in the process. It was not the outcome anyone could have predicted that morning when I had looked out my window and seen construction crews tearing up my property, but it was an outcome I could live with. The Ridgemont Hills parking lot scandal was over. Life went on, and I never had to worry about the HOA stealing my land again.